Welcome to the Irish Revolution. There is no better way to aggravate a Monaghan man such as myself by referring to Northern Ireland as if it were interchangeable with the word Ulster. Although many people refer to Ulster as the 6 counties that now constitute Northern Ireland, those of us from the border counties that are in the Republic of Ireland will tell you pretty quickly that we don't like it whenever you say Ulster is Northern Ireland, the 6 counties. The historic 9 counties, Ulster, 6 of them are in Northern Ireland, 3 of them are in the Republic. The 3 in the Republic are Monaghan, Cavan, Donegal. The 6 in the north, Derry, Antrim, Fermanagh, Tyrone, Armagh, Down. That's 6, right? Just remember that. The topic today is Ulster in the Irish Revolution. And I'm going to immediately contradict myself by telling you that I'm actually referring to Northern Ireland in the Irish Revolution, but Ulster in the Irish Revolution has just such a better ring to it. Let's have a little look at the background, which I covered in the very first episode. If you want to go back and watch that, Easter Rising Origins, you'll see a link there now. So in this episode, I'm referring to the 6 counties that will make up the future entity known as Northern Ireland, or Carsonia as it was called for a time by Southern nationalists, in reference to the great Unionist leader Edward Carson. By the way, if it wasn't already clear, Unionist in the Irish context refers not to trade unionists, but to somebody who believes in maintaining the union between Britain and Ireland. Again, if you happen to be unfamiliar with Irish history, Unionists tend to be Protestant or Presbyterian, and Nationalists or Republicans tend to be Catholics. Refer to the first episode again, where I explore the history of the politics and all that. Although Protestants formed a sizable minority in certain parts of Ireland at this time, they formed rather large majorities in the northern part of the island, specifically in the northeastern part of the island. This concentration created its own unique Unionist politics and culture, with the associated marching bands, the Orange Order, fraternal organisations, all that. It still has its own distinct culture, a loyalist or Unionist culture up there. Belfast and the northeast in general was industrial, which greatly contrasts with the mainly agricultural economy in the rest of Ireland. Now that I've clarified some of the basics, let's get into it. In 1912, the Ulster Volunteers were formed to resist the Home Rule movement. 500,000 people signed the Solemn League and Covenant, adamantly opposed to the proposed Home Rule Bill. There were at least 100,000 men enrolled in the Ulster Volunteers, many of whom were armed and prepared to resist the implementation of Home Rule with force. There was a mutiny in Curragh, County Kildare, way down in Leinster, among British officers stationed there, who said they would refuse to enforce Home Rule against Ulster Unionists. The Conservative Party under Bonar Law in London were implicitly supportive of the Unionists and the mutineers. The Conservative Party were essentially backing armed resistance to British laws. Now, this is incredible when you think about it, and it doesn't get the attention it deserves. In reaction to the Unionists, Irish nationalists formed the Irish Volunteers, which would go on to attract many men, but perhaps not as many weapons as the Ulster Volunteers were able to get. Prior to the outbreak of the First World War in 1914, it looked like Ireland would suffer a bloody civil war between 2 armed camps. Irish nationalists, keen to win favour with London, urged their countrymen to enlist, and many did in the opening months of the war. Home Rule was delayed for the duration of the war. So-called advanced nationalists, or Republicans, depending who you're talking about of course, who had been waiting in the wings for generations, launched an audacious rebellion Easter week 1916, seized the General Post Office in Dublin and other big buildings in the city, and declared the Irish Republic. These 2,000 rebels were unrepresentative of the country at large, who were more or less content with the constitutionalist nationalist Home Rule position. However, in just a few years, Sinn Féin, which didn't take part in the Easter Rising but which absorbed the nascent Republican movement, became the major force in the island and supplanted moderate nationalism. The last episode we did was about the 1918 election. As usual, Unionists cleaned up in the northeast where they predominated. Okay, let's look more specifically now at Ulster during the War of Independence. Let's just clarify this term a little bit, because I haven't really done the War of Independence yet in my other videos, so maybe I need to spend some time here. The year 1919, it would be difficult to say it was a war. The war really started when the Black and Tans arrived, and then it's called the Tan War. It was sort of a war, but it wasn't really a war until 1920, let's say. You'll know when I'm in the future when I start talking about the War of Independence. You'll see what I'm talking about. All right. 1919 wasn't as serious as 1920. Okay. I remember when I was in school, there was this kind of gimmicky sort of question. But Edward Carson, who I've spoken about a lot here, the leader of the Unionists. He's from Dublin actually. And the question that the history teachers like to put to you was, Edward Carson, Irish patriot. Now, from a certain perspective, that's a bit jarring because obviously he was a Unionist, he was loyal to the crown. But would Ireland have become an independent republic, or at least the southern part of Ireland, without Edward Carson? I think about that, and I really don't know. I really don't know. Without him, well, not just him, but like as a figurehead, without him as a figurehead radicalising Ulster politics in opposition to the Home Rule movement, I find it hard to see how the mainstream constitutionalist nationalism of the Irish Parliamentary Party could have been supplanted by the radical republicanism of Sinn Féin. But hey, that's just like my opinion, guy. But maybe, just maybe, I'm just throwing it out here, maybe it's controversial, maybe there should be a statue for the Dubliner outside Leinster House. And imagine the beautiful symmetry that would have with Stormont in Belfast. Carson in front of Stormont in Belfast, Carson in front of Leinster House in Dublin. Maybe someday, a symbol of unification of the island, we finally put this sad story behind us, no? Or maybe I'm a dreamer, I don't know. Anyway, let's move on. Okay. Ulster experienced the revolution, or the War of Independence, very differently to the rest of Ireland. Partition, by which I mean the division of Ireland north and south, was an established fact with the Government of Ireland Act in 1920. The Nationalist Home Rule Party were stronger here than in the rest of Ireland. Combined with large local Unionist populations, it was difficult for the IRA to assert themselves, as they did elsewhere in the island, by creating parallel state structures, which is very difficult to do when half or more of the population is loyal to the Crown. The Ancient Order of Hibernians, a fraternal organisation linked to the Nationalist Home Rule movement, was very strong in Nationalist Ulster, and it was often they, not the IRA, who manned the defence of Catholic areas during violent periods in the north. To quote one IRA officer reporting to Michael Collins, quote, "We not only had the British to fight, but also the Unionists and the Ancient Order Hibernians," unquote. The IRA were poorly organised as well. Even by spring 1921, when IRA organisation was approaching its zenith in the rest of Ireland, there was still no brigade structure in Ulster, and in some areas with a large Protestant population, almost no IRA volunteer organisation at all. For example, in Lisburn there was only one lowly IRA member. During the first 18 months of the War of Independence, Ulster was one of the quietest parts of the island. This began to change in the summer of 1920, possibly as a reaction to the election of a Catholic as mayor of the city of Derry, the first Catholic to become mayor in centuries. Just a little side note here, I'm going to call it Derry, alright? I'm not even going to pretend, I'm not going to say Derry, Londonderry. Obviously, there are a lot of people on the island of Ireland who call it Londonderry, and I believe British people call it Londonderry too. But I call it Derry. If you've got a problem with that, I don't care. As is often the case, political violence in Northern Ireland coincides with the summer marching season. For those of you who may be unaware, the Orange Order marches every summer to commemorate battles won centuries ago, and it culminates on July 12th when William of Orange defeated King James II at the Battle of the Boyne, 1690. There was widespread communal violence in Belfast in July 1920. This was a bad month in Irish history. There was growing paranoia and frustration among loyalists and unionists, and this culminated with the shipyard expulsions of the 21st of July 1920, when Protestant workers returning to work after the 12th of July holidays violently expelled their Catholic colleagues from the shipyards and engineering industries of East Belfast. What official IRA attacks there were often instigated by Southern IRA units. The assassination of Colonel George Smith in Cork on the 17th of July 1920 and RIC, i.e. the Royal Irish Constabulary, aka the police, District Commander Oswald Swansea on the 22nd of August led to awful reprisals in Belfast and other northern towns. The shooting of Swansea led to the virtual expulsion of the entire Catholic population in Lisburn. I'm going to quote Robert Lynch here, who I've borrowed from very heavily today. I make no bones of it, I'm really robbing from him here. Quote, "It was this dynamic, small-scale IRA actions along the border leading to reprisal, rioting and expulsions in major urban centres, especially Belfast, that was the chief characteristic of the violence in Ulster." Unquote. One estimate suggests that around 550 people were killed in Ulster during the 2 years after June 1920, which would make Ulster among the hottest regions in the Irish Revolution. Most of these deaths occurred in Belfast. Partition became a fait accompli in the north before the treaty negotiations in London. It would prove to be impossible to run the parallel state structures in Ulster, such as the Dáil courts, which were the truly revolutionary innovation in the rest of Ireland. Instead, a new counter-state was being developed by the new northern state. The IRA were in a tricky position and couldn't fight the war they wanted without risking reprisals against Catholics in Belfast. Bishop McRory of Down and Connor said, quote, "Catholics of Belfast being punished for the sins of their brethren elsewhere," unquote. Cahir Healy, a Northern nationalist, pleaded with the IRA leadership in Dublin to halt attacks due to the barbarity inflicted against Belfast's Catholic population. Adding fuel to the fire and the ferment in the north, in protest against atrocities perpetrated against Catholics, the Dáil introduced a boycott of all goods and services from Belfast, which was quickly dubbed the Belfast boycott. Enforcing this would quickly become a core function of IRA formations. In response to the increase of IRA activity, the Ulster Volunteer Force had been revived by the summer of 1920 and were conducting local patrols. By October 1920, the government called for the creation of its own auxiliary police force. The Belfast authorities had lost faith in the RIC. The Ulster Special Constabulary was established in October 1920 and grew to 35,000 members by June 1922. There were three classes. A Specials were full-time uniformed policemen who would later go on to form the core of the Royal Ulster Constabulary, RUC. B Specials would go on to earn a fierce reputation. They were part-time police, unpaid except for a small clothing allowance. They were allowed to keep weapons at home and would soon get involved in all manner of sectarian incidents, since inevitably their membership was almost exclusively Protestant. These specials were a kind of reserve force, only to be utilised in the case of extreme emergencies such as invasion. British support for this new structure was heavily criticised. Now let's have a look at the treaty period. While the IRA and the Crown forces observed a truce in July 1921, violence continued in the north. There were 16 deaths in Belfast alone in July 1921. One of the priorities of the treaty was to normalise relations between the two entities formed in the Government of Ireland Act 1920. While the South didn't recognise the new Home Rule Parliament created in Dublin, they used the elections as a chance to form the second Dáil, which the Sinn Féin party won overwhelmingly and also unopposed. The 6 northern counties formed Northern Ireland with a Unionist dominated parliament with 40 of the 52 seats. Just to be clear, Northern Ireland was not independent of London, but it would have its own devolved administration in Belfast. Interestingly, the other 12 seats were split between Sinn Féin and the Nationalist Party under Joe Devlin. The first 6 months of 1922 saw rising tension between the two new governments. Southern Republicans and Nationalists felt that the proposed Boundary Commission would so reduce Northern Ireland that it would become economically unviable. It is possible, in fact it is likely, that they were deliberately misled by British negotiators during the treaty, as the eventual Boundary Commission was nothing. It turned into a damn squib, I think is what they say. Michael Collins apparently believed that partition would be a far shakier concept than it eventually turned out to be, which has endured for almost a century. Was he deliberately misled? I guess we'll never know that for sure. Either way, partition did not become a major issue in the treaty debates in Dublin. In fact, it was hardly mentioned at all. Now, historians have talked about this a right bit. Not sure a right bit is very scholarly language, but anyway, historians have talked about this, and my personal conclusion is that Collins was told something by somebody secretly, as in he knew something that other people didn't know, because it's the only thing, in my opinion, that really explains his behaviour. I'm speculating, I don't know that, obviously, that's just my historical fiction popping out. If I wrote a historical novel about this period, I would write a lot about strange encounters in hallways in Whitehall between Collins and Secret Service men and stuff like that, because he really believed the Boundary Commission would change everything. And it was such a damn squib. Nothing came out of it, nothing at all, nothing useful. Michael Collins, now the leader of the new southern entity, and with the South on the brink of civil war, was pushing a confrontation in the north. He was trying to destabilise this new entity in Northern Ireland, at the same time putting together the institutions in the South, in what would become known as a Free State. He instigated an aggressive anti-partition policy. Perhaps he believed that a constant destabilisation of northern politics, coupled with aggressive anti-partition rhetoric, would bring about a united Ireland in his own lifetime, or, in his words, as a stepping stone. Whether in his lifetime or in maybe the next generation, I don't know. He was only a young man, by the way, so maybe he did believe he'd see it in his lifetime. Again, we don't know what was going through Collins' head at the time. We can only speculate. Nationalist-controlled local authorities were urged to opt out of the northern state. Their employees, school teachers, would be paid by the southern state, theoretically. The IRA, bitterly divided over the treaty and not quite at war with each other just yet, were united behind this new aggressive policy. There was a new propaganda campaign in the south directed at the northern government and the many sectarian atrocities which had taken place. The case was made for a radical adjustment to the border with the creation of the North Eastern Boundary Bureau, NEBB. The IRA in the north was reorganised and reinforced. Thousands of weapons and men poured over the new border. Attacks took place in border areas. One of the IRA's top guys, Ono Duffy, a future fascist by the way, but however, was tasked with coordinating IRA activity in Ulster. He's a Monaghan man, but I'm loath to claim the blue shirt. An audacious offensive was planned for the middle of May but fell apart at the last moment. It did, however, terrify the Unionist authorities, making them even more paranoid than they already were. The involvement of Collins and the provisional government in the South was to be kept a strict secret. Collins met with James Craig, the leader of the northern state, twice, once in January and again in March 1922. They discussed the boundary question and Collins spoke on behalf of Northern Catholic. Let me quote Robert Lynch again, quote, "Although the resultant Craig-Collins pact failed miserably, the most important implication of the negotiations was that the South, and Collins in particular, was now acknowledged as a representative of the Northern Catholic minority. For good or ill, the fate of the nationalist minority was thus inextricably linked to the future policy of the Southern administration and its leadership." Unquote. The increased level of IRA violence predictably led to reprisals. In Belfast, 250 people died in the 5 months from February to June 1922. The strategy was quite effective despite the cost. The survival of the new northern government was shaky, and the Belfast government was growing more and more mistrustful of London, feeling that London would tire the chaos and eventually appease the Southerners. The British government were growing more and more exhausted with the Belfast authorities and its inability to maintain order or prevent the sectarian atrocities, which were fast becoming an international embarrassment. British soldiers had been forced to intervene in Belleek and Pedigo, and if violence had continued, perhaps they would have had to intervene even more. At one point, it looked like the 1920 dispensation with the Northern government would unravel. But just as things were getting rockier, two crucial developments took place. Just by the way, I'm really not sure if direct rule from London was ever a reality. I don't know, maybe it was. I don't know, but I don't know how much more chaos London would have tolerated. Like, in the context of the Troubles, 250 people dead in 5 months in Belfast and surrounding towns, that's a pretty heavy casualty. Like, the War of Independence by international standards maybe didn't have a big body count, but 250 dead people in the Union like that's a big deal, huh? So maybe the British in London were getting a bit tired of it all, you know. William Twaddle, an MP, was assassinated in late May. The Special Powers Act were utilised in full. 700 IRA men were interned. Perhaps more significantly, the Civil War broke out in the South on 28th of June 1922. The Collins Northern strategy was turned on its head. Money and weapons dried up as the Southern government literally had to fight for its survival. Perhaps the final nail in the coffin of the Northern strategy was the death of Michael Collins in August 1922. Collins was one of the few Southerners, in my opinion, who ever seemed to understand or care about the North. The new leader, W.T. Cosgrave, did not make Northern Ireland a priority and instigated a policy of peaceful obstruction, whatever that means. IRA units were subsequently withdrawn from the north. The thousands of Belfast refugees who had gone to Dublin in the spring of 1922 were sent back to the north. Ernie O'Malley, a prominent IRA man and anti-treaty IRA man at that, wrote memorably about the Belfast Catholics in the Grand Kildare Street Club in his great memoir of the Civil War period, The Singing Flame. And hey, anyone watching this and made it this far, if you're still listening to me now, still paying attention, you'll love Ernie O'Malley's two memoirs of the revolutionary period. Go out and buy them now. Alright, if you intend to keep watching this show with me, I can't recommend a better memoir of the period, okay? Ernie O'Malley wrote two books. Go out, buy them. The Provisional Free State government recognised partition and moved to normalise relations with the North and had established customs posts along the border by 1923. There have been two states in Ireland, two entities on this island. Will that ever change? I don't know. Thanks for watching. I had to end the episode at some point, but don't worry, I will do an addendum at some point where I'll focus more concretely on the experience of Belfast during the Revolution, because that's interesting. I'll look a little closer at some of the grisly atrocities which took place there. Thanks again for watching. As ever, please like the video and subscribe. I really want subscribers, okay? All comments are, as ever, more than welcome. This one, I really tried to be balanced, okay? You're going to have to forgive the Derry thing. I'm not going to say Derry, Londonderry. I'm not going to say Stroke City. Just not going to do it. Of course, if you're a person watching this and you refer to it as Londonderry, total respect for you, you know. But for me, it's Derry. Alright? Anyway, maybe we'll talk about that in the comments. Anyway, good luck. Thanks very much for watching. Bye.